Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us during this session. It is my pleasure to introduce Ray Major, who is the Chief Economist for San Diego Association of Governments, the regional planning agency for the County of San Diego. As the Chief Economist for the San Diego region, responsibilities include developing and translating economic and transportation data and trends into accurate and relevant insights, dedicated to using data visualization analysis to help inform decision makers, responsible for the region's economic prosperity and for its short and long-term economic forecasts. Ray holds a bachelor's and master's degree in economics from San Diego State University. Thank you so much, Ray, for being here with us, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen here, and I will start my presentation. Thank you very much for having me speak on the San Diego regional economy. This is an update that I've started to put together that really is also a forecast for 2022. So I'll be talking a little bit about what to expect in 2022. There are some things that are significantly driving the San Diego regional economy in the last year, and I don't think this is going to be a surprise to anyone. But normally there are things that happen in an economy that cause a recession, for instance, or certain industries that are doing really well. But this particular last year has just been completely dominated by the COVID pandemic and all of the variants that have to do with COVID, like the Delta variant, for instance. We have huge labor force disruptions. We have unemployment rates that are significantly higher than we've seen in the past couple of decades. And at the same time, we have these record job openings. So we have tons of people who are looking for work or not looking for work, they're unemployed. And then there are tons of businesses that are looking for employees. And yet we've got this huge disparity here. This isn't something that we normally see in an economy. In addition to that, we see that inflation has really started to be in the news all of the time. And this is a very concerning trend that I think is going to last for the next couple of years at least. And we'll talk more about this during this presentation. And then, of course, housing prices are also in the news with home prices, a median home price hitting $816,000 recently, and prices being up 20% since last August. A lot of this has to do with the fact that we have historically low mortgage interest rates. These are the dominant forces that are really shaping the economy right now. I'd like to start out and talk a little bit about inflation. Inflation over the last 12 months has crept up to about 6.5%. We were historically over the last 10 years, let's say, had about 2% per year inflation. So this is a rate that's more than triple what we've been seeing. Now, the problem here, and I'll talk about this a little more in later slides, is that this really impacts your standard of living, because if you have a 6.5% inflation, it's like having a 6.5% decrease in your purchasing power, which would be like if you got a pay cut of 6.5%. Part of the problem is that we have the supply of goods issue and a demand issue. So with the supply, we see things like the supply chain being an issue. And with demand, we see tons of people who want to buy things. We're also seeing wage growth, and that's pushing up inflation also. But inflation is an interesting measure because we typically look at the CPI index. But if you look at some of the components that are under there, what you're going to see is that there is some areas that have significantly grown, and these are areas that all of us use on a regular basis. So energy, for instance, is up 31.3%. Gasoline, almost 40% up since last year. Electricity up by 20%. Food is up by 5.7% for food at home, but restaurants are up by 10%. And this is, I don't know the last time you went through a drive-through restaurant, but it could cost you $10 for a meal now if you buy a combo meal. It's just unbelievable, some of the prices that you see. And then we see 4.7% on everything when you take out energy and food. But within that core inflation, you also see used cars and trucks up by 23.4%. Some of this is due to supply chain issues. And the supply chain is something that we really haven't talked about in the last decade as being any type of a problem. But you've all heard about this, and it's in the news, and this is going to impact the San Diego economy and the South Bay economy for the next couple of years, probably, as we work through it. Not, it's going to take a while to work through. So a lot of impact now. We're going to figure out some of this in the coming months, but this is going to be here for a while. There's a backlog of over 100 ships in the port of Long Beach. We're short by 80,000 truck drivers. This is forcing prices to increase of shipping. A container can now cost $10,000 to move, where last year it may have been about $1,000. And there's record high demand for consumable goods by people. So we need to bring in more things so people can buy them. If people don't buy those, don't have those things to buy, they start bidding up the price, and that adds to inflation. We've also started to see panic buying and hoarding again. So, we had the great toilet paper shortage of 2020. I think you're going to see those type of shortages again as people are pretty surprised and uncomfortable when they walk into a store and see that the shelves are missing a lot of the items that they purchase on a regular basis. And then when they do see those in stock, they're going to buy multiple ones of them. And we may also start to see food shortages. This graph shows the CPI which is the Consumer Price Index in San Diego. It's a year-over-year change, and it shows it over the last 20 years what's happened. And you can see we're right now at 6.5%, which is about as high as it's been in the last 20 years. But what's more concerning is the Producer Price Index, which is what what the goods are costing producers. And you see that this has gone up significantly. It's at 8.6%. The reason that this is important is that the cost of the goods that go into the things that are produced will find their way into the cost of those commodities when they hit the stores after they're actually manufactured. And so as the cost of the goods increases, you're also going to see significant increases in store shelves. Now, the cost of construction has also gone up incredibly in the last couple of months, and mostly during this COVID disruption. Part of this is a supply chain issue, and some of it has to do with demand also. But you can see that construction prices have gone up by 13.5% year over year. And although we've seen some relief in prices like lumber, I don't think that you're going to see these prices fall significantly anytime soon. When we take a look at the impact of COVID, pre-COVID, we had unemployment rates of about 3.2% in the region. And you can see that the South Bay area, the South County EDC area, had a little bit higher unemployment rate than the rest of the region. So about, in some areas, 6%, but mostly in the 4% area. When you fast forward to August 2021, we saw about 6.1%, so about double the unemployment. And you can see again that the South Bay area is hit the hardest of all of the areas in the region. And we've seen a little bit of relief in the last month as some of those government subsidies have gone away, and the economy has opened up a little bit in terms of people being able to get to work more easily, and the schools opened up. And so you see a little bit of relief. But again, still the hardest hit areas are right along the border area, all part of the South County EDC service area. Unemployment during the recession looks something like this. The blue line represents the 1991 recession, which is a normal recession. What happens is that we lose employees, and then it takes a while to gain those back in the economy. The 91 recession took about 4 years to recover from. The Great Recession, you see the orange line, we lost about 8% of our workforce. And then you saw it take about 5 years to recover. The green line that we're tracking right now shows this COVID disruption and the recovery from that. And you see the unprecedented job loss that happened at the beginning of COVID. And you see that we were recovering from there. In the early days, people called that a V recovery and then a U-shaped recovery. And now this, to me, looks like it's going to be more of the checkmark recovery, which is another term that's being used. But that green line right now is just about at the very bottom which is what the worst unemployment that we had during the Great Recession, is about where we are right now. So we are not out of the woods yet in terms of recovering from this thing from an economic perspective. There's a long way to go. And if history is any indication of what might happen, we could still be seeing about 3 or 4 years before we get back to something that is normal in terms of employment. Here are the hardest hit sectors in the San Diego region. Over the pandemic period, we've lost about 109,000 jobs total. About 75,000, or about 70% of those, fall into 3 categories: tourism, education, and retail. One of the reasons this is important to the South Bay area is that a lot of the jobs of the people who live in the South Bay area are related to tourism, education, and retail. And that's why we see higher unemployment rates in those areas. Tourism has taken the biggest hit. That includes restaurants, as well as hotels and motels, and some of the other activities, like, for instance, the zoo and SeaWorld. Education is still down. Part of that is teachers, but a lot of that is after school type programs. And then, of course, there are a lot of retail places that have lost employees too. So that's where you see the hardest hit sectors. There has been some growth, though, during the pandemic in construction, and we see a lot of construction happening both on the residential side and commercial side, as well as in the innovation sector, which is the high-tech, biotech employment that happens around the UCSD area. Now, this is a very important graph to take a look at, and this is employment by income category. And what we see here is in the blue line, that's the median income. The bottom 25% of the wage earners are in the green line. The top 25% are in the red line. And what this shows is employment by income category. So it's indexed to 0, which basically means before COVID, we take a look at those numbers. We see there was great job loss by April 1st in all 3 categories. But the group that was hit the hardest were the ones that were making the lowest wages, the minimum wage. And the reason that this is important is that the area that we're kind of concerned with, which is the South County EDC area, there are a lot of low income people who live in that particular area. And as you look at these lines going through time, what you see that by August 1st, you still have about a 25% unemployment rate in those jobs that pay less than $37,000 per year. So these are the minimum wage to about $19 to $20 an hour jobs. Those people who are making above minimum wage, above the median income, have pretty much recovered and are all back to work. So again, this is impacting a specific part of the workforce. We took a look at South Bay traffic, and I just thought I'd put this up for you in terms of it's an interesting graph. And what we looked at was, how did the pandemic influence traffic? And what we see here is that traffic went down during the recession, which is what you would have, during the COVID lockdowns in April 20. We see significant reductions at the I-5 at E Street, the SR 905, as well as the I-805. But you see that all of those have pretty much recovered to pre-pandemic levels, even though there are still a lot of people who are unemployed. So imagine what's going to happen when those people go back to work. Essentially, we'll be way back above normal in terms of traffic. Reason that this is important, is that these infrastructure improvements that need to be made in the region will continue to need to be made. There's a lot of people thought, oh, work from home is going to take this over, and it really didn't. When we look at wages, which is probably more important to people than anything else, in terms of nominal wages, this again is looking at the bottom quartile and the top quartile in blue and green, with the median as orange. And what you see here is that over since the Great Recession in 2007, so over the last 13, 14 years, we've seen an increase in nominal hourly wages. That's the actual dollars that people are being paid in all 3 groups. But when we correct for inflation, it kind of shows a little bit of a different story. The The group that has been doing the best recently are those people who are in the bottom 25% of wage earners. So for a long time, as we recovered from the Great Recession, there was about a 1% increase in economic growth during that entire time period. The people who are making the top quartile of workers or income, they were doing better than the rest of the region. But now you see that there's a lot of demand for that lower end. So when you take a look at fast food restaurants, for instance, you'll see signs that are saying, hiring $18 an hour, for instance, sometimes up to $20 an hour, but certainly way past that $15 an hour minimum wage that everybody was fighting for just a couple of years ago. And that proves out in this data. So that was kind of 2019-ish, that $15 was the goal. And now you can see what's happened in terms of wages. They've really gone up for the bottom quartile, not as much for the median though. Now, another interesting story is spending. With all of the people who are unemployed, you would imagine that the region's spending would be going down because people would have less money to spend. This graph again takes us back to before COVID. You see the big dip during COVID in spending. Then all of a sudden, the stimulus payments come out, people start spending more money. And sometime around April of last year, we were back to spending about as much as we were spending previously. And now, as of September 5th, the spending is actually up 16.2% over where it was at the beginning of COVID. And so a tremendous amount of money in the economy, even though people aren't working. And people are spending this money, and that's really what's driving prices in many cases. These are the categories of spending that we see changes in. Now, this is a U.S. level data set, but I think that it still relates to San Diego and the South Bay region. The change in spending is really in a couple of categories, and that's in durable goods and non-durable goods, and then followed by housing and then financial services. But what this really means is people have shifted during COVID. They shifted their spending from healthcare, from accommodations, which would have been hotel, motel, that people going on vacation, for instance, from food services going out to restaurants, from transportation services, which is expenditure on airline tickets or expenditure on things like vacations or Uber and Lyft. And they started spending it on the internet, and they started spending more money on kind of retail therapy, right? People were buying things. First of all, we were going to all fix up our yards. That was a big expenditure that happened. And then people started to buy other things, that both durable and non-durable goods. And we see that spending change. This takes a look at what's happened just essentially in 2021. And again, this trend continues. There's been spending now that's increased in all categories. But again, the durable and non-durable goods categories are increasing the most. This may also just be well, it's partially a function of the increases in prices, because this is looking at the number of dollars that are spent. But this is a change in how we have functioned through in terms of spending through the this pandemic. In terms of housing prices, we see that the median housing price in San Diego has hit an all-time high of $816,000 as of August 2021. And Goldman Sachs has done some forecasts as others, and they expect increases in 2022 to be about 16% again. So you're not going to see a lot of relief in housing prices. I know right now, this month, things have kind of slowed down a little bit, but this trend isn't going to go away. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that we just don't have enough houses here in San Diego. And another reason is because the houses are still, in relative terms, affordable. This graph shows, and I'll explain that because I know many people don't think that housing is affordable. But what this graph shows you is the percentage of people who could afford to purchase a median price single family home at different periods in time. So if you take a look at right before the Great Recession, only about 9% of San Diegans could purchase a median priced home. After we went into the recession, about 46% in San Diego could afford to buy a median price home. We're now at about 22% with these astronomical prices of homes. The only difference, and in fact, the median price home peaked at about $600,000 back in 2007 when it was 9%. So now housing is more expensive, but more people can afford it, yet wages aren't up that much. So the question is, well, what's the variable that allows more people to afford the homes? And the answer there is interest rates. And so when we were looking at, excuse me, 9%, 9% affordability, interest rates were approximately 6.5%. Now they're closer to 3%. And so more people are able to buy a house and borrow more money. But really what that's doing is creating a huge amount of debt that they need to pay back. So that's the one reason that people can afford more housing. So if you see interest rates start to creep up, what you're going to see is housing affordability to plummet. And the Fed is talking a little bit about raising interest rates. I don't know exactly how that's going to play out for mortgage interest rates yet, but that would be an indicator that I would watch over the next year. Another interesting statistic to look at is what does it take to qualify for a median price home? And right now, if you wanted to buy a median house price home, which was $860,000, you need a qualifying income of about $153,000. The median income in San Diego is closer to $84,000. And there are a lot of people in the South Bay area that earn even less than that, which means they can purchase a house that's less than $460,000. When the median price home is $860,000 and your income only allows you to buy $460,000, you have a huge problem here in being able to house those people who are making less than the average income in the region. A lot of there are a lot of different reasons for the housing crisis that we're currently in, but one of the problems we have is that we just haven't built enough housing. During the decades of the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, we were building in a completely different manner. We would go out and they would basically bulldoze a bunch of land and they would put up housing developments. And so you see a lot of things like East Lake being built during the early 2000s, and a ton of houses being put in there. And the same thing in the 80s. East Lake was being built out for the first phases of it, and you're looking at like 40,000 units a year being built. Well, we're now building significantly less than that. On average, over the last decade, we've built about 7,700 units or so. But what's happened is that the demand has continued to increase as our population increases and as it gets older and more kids are looking for housing. And what that's led to is a shortage of about 63,000 units. This is a huge number, especially then when you add in the fact that Airbnb and second homes are probably constitute another 40,000 or so homes in the region. There's about 100,000 units that are not available right now for people who really need housing. So again, this is one of the bigger problems that we have in the region. So what to expect from 2022? I think that next year, look for COVID-19 again to continue to drive the economy. Until you don't hear about it in the news and we're not wearing masks anymore and we're not talking about vaccinations, this is going to have economic impacts on different sectors of the economy, whether it's the supply chain or whether it's getting people back to work or kids into school, et cetera. So that's going to be the driver. We're going to have slowing rates of inflation. I think in the next couple of years, maybe 22 will start to slow down, but we're still going to have high inflation given what what recent history has shown. So that's going to be 2 years of really high inflation eating into buying power. I think we have continued rates of high unemployment. Some of that is going to fall as some of the government subsidies are rolled back. If you see more subsidies coming out, you're going to see people choosing not to be in the workforce again. So there's a couple of reasons that people are on the unemployment rolls, and one of them is that they're choosing not to work, but and partially because of subsidies. But there are legitimate reasons too, like people who are taking care of people who may be potentially susceptible to COVID. And so there are some legitimate reasons there for people not working. And so we have an unemployment problem into 2022 to get the workforce back. Sharp increases in wages. as employers at all categories are going to be competing for the people who are willing to work. And I think businesses are going to continue to struggle. Businesses work best when businesses have certainty, not uncertainty. And 2022 will be a year of uncertainty. We'll have a reduction in disposable personal income. That's going to be a reduction in the standard of living or quality of life. I think housing prices continue to stay high. And I think that the Fed will continue to keep interest rates relatively low. So the housing market will remain very hot for the next year. And I think you're going to continue to see federal intervention, which is something that we didn't really see over the last as we came out of the recession. There was some as we came out of the Great Recession in the banking industries, but not the way we've seen it recently. And so I think you're going to see that continue in 2022. I'd like to share some South County specific data that I've pulled together for you. This is the South County Economic Development Council area on the map on the right. It constitutes about 500,000 people, which is about 15% of the San Diego region's population. There are 231,000 people who are employed in this area, and about 53% of them have incomes above $60,000. There are 137,000 jobs that are in this particular area, and it contains about 13.4% of San Diego's housing stock. So that's the basic demographics of this green study area. When you take a look at South County in terms of education compared to the rest of the region, one of the things that we see is that there's a higher proportion of people who have less than high school or high school education, and fewer people who have bachelor's degrees or higher. And a lot of this has to do with the recent immigrants who live in that area, but and it also, you'll see in a minute that it's correlated with some of the income levels that we see in this particular area. In terms of South County occupations, when we compare these to the region, these are the top 10 categories of occupations, and what the blue bars represent is the South County EDC area compared to the rest of the region. So you see there are fewer people who are in management or business finance positions, but there are more people who are in, as a proportion, in office and administrative support, a few more in sales, not as much in education or legal, and then you see the bars go down. So this is data that you can use to kind of understand what kind of occupations there are in the region. This map shows where South County workers live. So I talked a little bit about the people who live in South County. Well, where do they work? Not everyone who lives in South County works in South County. In fact, of the 137,000 workers who live in South County, about 67,000 of those live and work in South County, but about 70,000 commute out of the region. So about 50% of the people commute out of the region. If you look at the map, those blue dots represent the location of where the people are going. So they live in the green area and they work in the blue area. So, oh, sorry, no, I'm sorry. This represents the people who work in South County. So the blue area, these are the people coming into South County. I'm sorry, that was a miscommunication on my part. This is where South County workers work. Okay, so here we see about 29% of the South County residents who also work in South County, and about 71% or 164% of South County residents work outside of South County, and they're commuting up to places like Kearny Mesa, downtown San Diego, up to the Sereno Valley, but also all the way up to Escondido, San Marcos, Vista, Oceanside, for instance, for jobs. The South County residents have some of the longest commutes in the region. This shows you the percentage of people who are going to these major employment centers, or just a little bit more detail. And what you can see here is that of the people who live in South County who are employed, about 14,000 of them, or about 6% of the workforce, goes to downtown San Diego. About 12,000 is going to Kearny Mesa, and about 9,000 is going to National City, which is that's a live and work statistic, but that's the third biggest employment center. So this kind of shows you where people work and live. This is some new data that we're putting together. I just want to spend a minute showing you this project we're working on called Community Characteristics. It's coming in January of 2022. so that we can use this type of data to really help communities better understand who lives there. And this is a statistical type of analysis, is cluster analysis that allows us to understand a little bit more about populations. There are 10 different groups that exist in San Diego, and they go from diverse and diligent. As you can see, the groups have different names. The red groups represent those groups that are more urban, the blue ones more suburban, and the green ones roughly rural. And then this shows you the percentage of people who live in each city and how many are in each group. So this is just an overview. I put this in the deck, so if anybody wants to look at this after the meeting, you can kind of understand what the entire region looks like. But what I wanted to show you is in terms of the South County EDC area, the three largest groups are diverse and diligent, imaginative and innovative, and active and affluent. Those are the three biggest groups. They represent the largest percentage of the population. And so I want to talk a little bit about what kind of data we're collecting for these groups, so that you'll see and can start thinking about how you might be able to use it. So these are the three groups. Of the residents, about 33.5% of the residents in the South County EDC area fall into the diverse and diligent. You can see 14.1% fall into imaginative and innovative, and about 11.2% into active and affluent. So let me show you what that looks like from a regional perspective. These maps show you the concentration of people who fall into these different groups. The red map obviously showing diverse and diligent. And so this gives you kind of an overview. I'm going to zoom in here real quick. I'm running out of time, so I'm just going a little bit quickly here. But for instance, this particular group is a group that has about, is the predominant group in the South County EDC area. And there's a lot of things that we know about them in terms of statistics, demographic information. For instance, it's about 35% of the population is Hispanic. About 51% of the households don't have children. This particular community, when you look at it from an income perspective, about 36% of the people earn less than $30,000, and about 57% of the people earn about less than $50,000. And it's also a rather young demographic, in the sense that 47% of these households, the head of household falls into an age range of 25 to 44. So relatively young. This particular group is a group that does not have college education, and they have relatively low incomes. When you look at imaginative and innovative, this is the second largest group that's represented in this particular area. This particular group has about 2 in every 3 people who live there are ages 24 to 44. The households are predominantly without children. About 2/3 of the group have some type of college education. And the interesting thing here is that about 51% of them have people who live in this area have an income of between $50,000 and $100,000. And so a little bit, this is still a young group. 61% fall between 25 and 44, but it's a more affluent group in terms of income levels and education. And finally, when we take a look at the final group that makes up about 11% of this area, active and affluent, what we see here is that, and you'll see this obviously is around the 125 in the East Lake area, about 61% of these households have children, and you see that about 76% make incomes more than $100,000. So this particular community obviously is more wealthy, and the head of household is also older. It's between 35 and 54, and this group also has the highest college education levels, as well as home ownership. And so these type of data can really be used to zoom into a specific area and really understand the needs of the community. And when you couple this with the type of jobs that are in the area, or the type of businesses that are opening up, you can really start to really understand the characteristics of a study area like this one. So with that, I will turn it over, or turn it back to you for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ray. I really appreciate that. And we did get a few questions, but we are out of time. So I will share those with you and we can get those back to some folks.
That would be great.
But I really do appreciate it. It's an amazing insight. And thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.